Hello, welcome to Module 3 of PHM 601. For this module, we'll be talking about social determinants of health. And there are three learning objectives for today's class. The first is to provide some form of, bit of insight into what social determinants of health is. Also, do the same for ecological determinants of health. And then finally, we're going to kind of discuss how social and ecological determinants of health influence health outcome. A lot of the third part, the third part of the learning objective is going to be what is going to be part of your assessment when you are doing your new learning and your interactive discussion board. So I'm going to expect to see some form of critical discussion or critical reasoning about, taking what was taught in this lecture and trying to apply it in, hypothetical situation or lived experience, whether something you've heard or something you've read about. So I really want to see you guys having as much in-depth conversation about it as possible. So, beginning with objective one, we are, basically talking about social determinants of health. So, you guys may already have seen this rainbow model, which is the Whitehead model that was kind of adapted for 2007, and it tried to conceptualize how social determinants of health works. You have the individual factors like age, sex, constitutional factors, and then you know going into the social and community networks, and then you go even further to general socio-ecological, cultural, and environmental conditions. So basically, the ones at the bigger end of the rainbow have greater influence on one's health far more than the smaller ones in like the individual factors. The individual factors have relatively much smaller impact on one's health compared to the bigger ones. So what this model try to show us is thinking in terms of professionals, healthcare professionals, to know where to put our energy in when it comes to designing healthcare programs or healthcare interventions. But even when you are doing having discussions about health and stuff like that. So always have this model in mind when there's always this discourse that is coming on about what are things that what are the factors that are associated with health outcomes or impacts of health. So, a few definitions that you may also already have heard about is WHO's definition of what social determinants of health is, and it basically is telling you the conditions in which people are born, they grow, they live, they work, they age. So, basically, from this definition, you could imagine that almost everything is kind of put into it from the time even when you're in vitro to the time that you actually go back to the ground. There's so many things that are happening in your life. They are all influencing what your health is. All of them all have an impact on your health. Another definition is trying to tell you that how these conditions are have they're shaped by distribution of money, by power, by resources, and this is not just on the local level, it's happening on the global, on the national level. And so that is why as healthcare professionals you do have to pay attention to economic policies or social policies or choices, because all of this, whether they are directly in health or not, even policies made from, let's use for example, business end of it, will have influence on one's health, or policies done from food security, agriculture, and stuff like that. They all have impact on health. So that's basically what that is about. And not the other determinants, social determinants of health you can think of. You can if you're trying to conceptualize in terms of what are those social determinants of health. We'll be looking in terms of occupation, race, ethnicity, social capital. We have power, and then this image kind of describes all the different other types of social determinants of health, where you have economic stability, you have access to education as well as a quality of education. All of this are social determinants of health. And this is not an exhaustive list. The honest truth is that if whatever is going through your mind and you're thinking, could this be social determinants of health? The chances are very, very likely that whatever it is a social determinant of health, because you have, having food insecurity coming in, early childhood development, structural conflict in terms of places, political, countries that have some kind of, political uprising or upheaval, or, something's all going on. They all have impacts on health. So, like I said, if you're thinking about it, it is most likely going to be a determinant of health. So now we're going into the ecological determinants of health. Now, you may wonder, what is the difference between social determinants of health and ecological determinants of health? So the ecological determinants, what they basically do is that they emphasize the interdependence of, all of what is going on in the environment and how it affects human health. So it is a little bit a broader way of understanding social determinants of health and trying to marry that to the system, to the environment, and how all of that all play a role. Maybe when I talk about those examples of those uh, um, as components, you understand what I mean. In terms of the physical components, they are looking at terms like housing, climate, geography, radiation, and then with the biological, we're talking about viruses, man, and stuff like that. And then you have the social, psychosocial, where we're talking about cultural values, education, and stuff like that. So I'm going to use, and I'm trying to find an example of how these different components interconnect. So let me use migration as an example. For a lot of communities, especially those who are entering a place that is of a different race or a different ethnicity from where they're coming from, you will find that a lot of migrants tend to live in the same area. Right, and they do this for a reason of social cohesion and social inclusion. You're a stranger in this land, and you want, you're looking for things that are familiar to you, so you tend to go where the people who are familiar to you are. So you have those cultural values and customs playing a part in that. But at the same time, migrants for the most part do not come in with a lot of money. I mean, for the most part, and this is, even if we're not talking about things like refugees and stuff like that, for a whole lot reason, you are kind of leaving your country where you have roots, and when you have all of these structures, and you're going into a different country, there's a limit to how much things you can take from with you from your country into a new country. There's going to be a whole lot more you're going to leave behind. So relatively, you're going to be dealing with your social economic place kind of shrinks a little bit when you are going there. So, which then means that you're very likely going to have far less money than wherever it is that you were living, which means that you're going to be looking for houses where things are cheap, right? Cheaper houses. And those cheaper houses, also there's a very good likelihood that you may be dealing with things like environmental hazards, debris, or even you're living in a place that is very close to industries, and the noise that comes from it. And but it could also mean that because it's in that area of town, there's possibly not been a lot of policies that have been done to make sure that everything is at topmost, a tip top state. And which also mean you may be dealing with a bit of fraudulent people, not so ethical landlords and stuff, who may not be taking much interest into rodent control and stuff like that. So, do you see how there's so much interconnectivity between these different components, going from being a migrant who's moving into a new country, and how all of this are now being interconnected with the way your life then goes in that new country? So that is what the ecological determinant of health tries to, shed a light on, to say that there is a lot of interdependent relationship between the different components or systems of the environment, and all of that affects health. So the basic premise for ecological thinking is that human health and their determinants, they interrelate, and those different determinants of health lead to different patterns in the burdens of diseases, which means that depending on the way those different determinants are interrelated within each other, what your burden of disease will change. For example, if you have a person who is probably dealing more with the physical and the psychosocial, the pattern of their behavior, their disease outcome or burdens of disease is going to be different from a person who's dealing with, for example, all three components that I mentioned. So those are one of the things to kind of pay attention to. And then some of the human forces that are driving these changes in the ecosystem, which are, thereby leading to all these ecological determinants of health. They include population growth, urbanization, economic growth, social changes, and the example that I used, migration. So all of these things that are happening in the ecosystem are having a knock-on effect on one's health. So you would find, by the time you're having a change, when people are moving out or people are moving in, things start changing in the way the kind of diseases that the healthcare system starts being able to handle starts changing. You may start seeing some illnesses that they have not been seen before, just because of things are changing, and in the world is changing, and people are eating food that they were not eating before, like 300 years ago or 100 years ago or something like that. Because I remember what happened with in Africa, when you had a lot of fast food places coming from the US, coming from the UK, or coming to set up, a shop in different cities in the countries in Africa. And then you had this disease picture started changing, where right now Africa is dealing with what is called the double burden of diseases, where they have both communicable diseases and trying to tackle that, as well as non-communicable diseases, which was not how the health landscape looked some years ago. But because of the changes because of the social changes, because of urbanization and economic growth and all the things that came with it, how healthcare is being presented starts changing. So that is how that's what the ecological model basically is trying to get us to start thinking around. So for the third objective, we're going to talk about the determinants of health and the influence they have on health outcomes. So I'm going to start by describing health disparities, which I'm pretty sure you guys have been introduced to, but just for the sake of just saying it, health disparities relate to the differences in the quality of healthcare that is not due to access related factors or clinical needs and preferences and stuff. So basically, long story short, health disparities is how one people is having a different presentation of their healthcare compared to another population. So you can have within a population, different segments of the population have disease being presented in a different way from the other ones. This will kind of see this. This is a health disparity, and it can come in terms of quality of or healthcare. So the differences, that come as a result of that, leads to the health disparities could include the role of biases and discrimination or stereotyping, and that happens within providers of healthcare. Could also be on an institutional or healthcare system level. I would encourage you guys to read up on structural racism, because it's something that is very, very interesting and very, very important. When we start talking about institutional levels of influence on health. So read up on structural racism and how that kind of plays out with health. It's not one of the assigned reading, but it's just something to read up on your own, and you would kind of see how that also works out. And I'm going to include a video on cultural competence as well in the as optional viewing, that you might decide, just to learn a little bit about cultural competency and stuff. But it will be something that will be discussed in detail in another course, if you guys do take that. So, but just to understand that the health disparities can come from all of these structural uh, um, factors. So, and health disparities, can adversely affect groups of people and who have systematically experienced greater obstacles to health based on social determinants of health or ecological determinants of health. Basically, what that's saying is that the social determinants of health and the ecological determinants of health can contribute to some population of people having a greater obstacle to what their health will be. It could reduce their access to health care. It could reduce the quality of care that they receive, thereby, influencing their uptake of services, available services. So you have health social determinants of health, and you have the ecological determinants of health. They all play a part in how people, different population, interact with the healthcare system, and therefore it then influences what their health outcome is. So, going to use this example, you have differences in social determinants of health, leading to disparities in health outcome. You see social determinants of health disparities existing among racial or ethnic minority, which result in health disparities. And then you have the upstream social determinants of health. At the upstream, we're kind of talking about policies, systemic policies at this point, and having to change things from a political um, um, end of things. If you are familiar with the ecological model, you will see, with policy being at the very top in terms of influence. So social determinants of health at that level, at the upstream level, also having an influence on health disparities. And all of this then lead to health outcome in terms of mobility, mortality, and mobility in terms of moving up and down, and also in physical and one social roles. I am going to also encourage you guys, this is, if you want to read up on social mobility, that's social mobility, and try to think of it from an ecological standpoint, from a social ecological determinant of health. Just do read up on social mobility for that. So this is where we end for today's lecture. Please always use the Q&A board to seek clarification if there's any parts of this course or the assigned viewing that is kind of not clear to you, and I would answer the questions as soon as I can. Do have a lovely day. Bye.